Okay, let's unpack this. Here's a statistic that, well, it really sets the stage for our deep dive today. It's kind of mind-blowing.
What's that?
Roughly 90%. 90% of Christian missionaries globally are actually working with people who are already Christian or at least have had, significant exposure.
90%, wow.
Yeah, which leaves, what, a mere 10% focused on reaching those who haven't heard?
That's quite a split.
It is. And this stark division, it immediately raises a big question for us.
Hmm.
Are we focusing our efforts where the need is actually greatest? This comes from Winter and Koch, by the way, a fascinating starting point.
It really is. And what's key here, I think, is understanding that distinction between reached and unreached people groups. It's crucial.
Define those for us quickly.
Okay, so reached generally means communities where there's already an established Christian presence. The core message is pretty readily accessible.
Got it. Churches, Bibles available, that sort of thing.
That's exactly. But unreached groups,
Yeah.
that's different. They have very little, maybe even no access to this message. They often lack enough local believers to effectively share the faith within their own culture, their own language.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So the mission for our deep dive today, then, is to really try and understand this imbalance, this focus, and the resource allocation that goes with it.
Yeah, exploring the factors behind that 90-10 split.
Exactly. And the implications. We've got data looking at missionary distribution across different world religions, even how many missionaries different countries receive per capita. Plus, we'll dig into a related imbalance, the distribution of, like, Christian workers generally, evangelistic activities, and even materials like Bibles and Christian magazines.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, it's really about a significant allocation of, well, effort and resources.
Yeah.
And the data we're looking at, it clearly illustrates this unevenness. Figure 5, for instance, visually just underscores that dramatic 90-10 split you mentioned, reached versus unreached.
And it's not just about geography, is it? Figure 6 breaks it down further. It shows the distribution of Christian missionaries among people of different world religions.
Okay.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The overwhelming majority. They're engaged with populations that already identify as Christian.
So Christian to Christian work, largely.
A lot of it, yeah. With a comparatively tiny number reaching out to those who follow other major faiths, it really makes you wonder about the strategic priorities.
It certainly raises big questions about the overall effectiveness, maybe the scope, of global Christian outreach, doesn't it?
It does. Then Figure 7 gives us that country-level view. Missionaries received per million residents.
Right, the per capita numbers.
And what it starkly shows is this geographical concentration. Like, imagine a heat map.
Okay.
The areas glowing brightest, meaning the most missionaries per person, are often places where Christianity is already, pretty well established. Parts of North America,
Yeah.
Europe.
Makes sense?
But the cooler regions, the ones with the fewest missionaries, they cluster in North Africa, the Middle East, Asia.
Exactly. The areas often cited as having the largest unreached populations.
Precisely. So why? Why this skew? Our sources offer some potential explanations.
Okay, like what?
Well, one that kind of jumps out is the role of short-term mission trips. They're huge now, right?
Very popular, yes.
The thinking is, because many long-term missionaries are already in these reached areas, that's often where the short-term teams go to partner.
So they partner with existing work.
Yeah, which might inadvertently reinforce the existing pattern. It just keeps funneling people towards the same places.
That's interesting. And there's often this underlying assumption, isn't there, that if someone have a positive short-term trip, they might then feel called to go long-term to that same area.
Right, which sounds good, but if most trips are going to reached areas,
then it potentially perpetuates the focus on those who already have access. The sources suggest the sheer volume might unintentionally do that.
okay. And then there are the practical hurdles, right? It's not always easy getting to the unreached.
Absolutely not. There are very real challenges. The sources highlight the difficulties in just obtaining missionary visas.
Right, in countries or regions that might be less welcoming politically or culturally.
Yeah, unwelcoming environments. That can create significant barriers for people who genuinely feel called to those specific places.
It's a real constraint.
And this kind of connects to that example of the Apostle Paul in Acts, which the source mentions.
Oh, yeah.
Paul had his own plans, right, where he wanted to preach, but he was redirected by the Holy Spirit, the text says.
The Macedonian call.
Exactly. And the implication drawn here is maybe our modern strategies could also benefit from, well, The source calls them spirit-adjusted plans,
Spirit-adjusted plans.
meaning like a willingness to prayerfully reevaluate, maybe shift focus based on guidance and the actual needs on the ground, not just our existing structures or assumptions.
Okay, so it's not just about the missionaries themselves, the personnel. This imbalance seems to stretch further
How so?
to other crucial Christian resources. We're talking distribution of Christian workers in general, not just designated missionaries.
Okay.
And the focus of evangelistic and discipling activities. Even the availability of stuff like Bibles, Christian magazines, the material.
Right, the tools of the trade, so to speak.
Yeah.
Figure 8 illustrates this well. It shows countries' proportional shares of the world's Christian workers relative to their population.
Proportional share, how does that work?
Well, a score of 1.0 would mean a country has a share of Christian workers perfectly proportionate to its population size.
Okay.
What stands out is that many nations within what's often called the 1040 window.
Right, to define that for us again.
Sure. It's that geographical belt, roughly between 10 and 40 degrees north latitude, stretching across North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, known for its high concentration of unreached people groups.
Got it. So within that window.
Many of those nations have considerably less than their proportional share of Christian workers, much less than 1.0.
Well, other places.
Meanwhile, countries like, say, the United States show a significantly higher proportion, way above 1.0.
And it's a similar story with actual outreach efforts.
Seems so. Figure 9 looks at annual evangelism offers per person.
Evangelism offers, like chances to hear the message.
Yeah, essentially opportunities for exposure to evangelistic activities.
Yeah.
And again, it seems regions with an already strong Christian presence tend to receive more offers per person.
And those with fewer Christians.
Significantly less. It almost feels like, concentrating efforts where the ground is already pretty fertile.
Preaching to the choir almost in terms of resource allocation.
Well, it certainly highlights a potential misallocation of proactive outreach. It raises that question. Are current strategies inadvertently prioritizing reaching those who are already more likely to encounter the message anyway?
Instead of those with virtually no opportunity.
Precisely.
Okay, then there's figure 10. This uses Christian periodicals, magazines, journals, that kind of thing, as a proxy for the broader imbalance in resource materials.
A representative sample.
And the disparities are, well, pretty stark. Many Western nations show an abundance, lots of materials,
Wow.
while countries with large unreached populations have incredibly low shares. Afghanistan is the example given. Its proportional share is just 0.00035.
0.0035. That's vanishingly small.
It is. To put that in perspective, like for every 1,000 Christian periodicals you might find circulating proportionally in a Western nation, Afghanistan would have less than one.
Wow.
Yeah.
That really drives home the scarcity of these tangible resources in some parts of the world.
It really does.
And what's significant here is how concrete this is. We're not just talking about people being present or absent. We're looking at the availability of actual tools. Things can be instrumental in sharing and understanding the faith.
Yeah, the physical stuff matters too. Our sources also bring in some really thought-provoking perspectives on all this. There's this powerful quote from Dick Eastman. It's apparently from the late 70s, but got shared again in the 90s. He pointed out that American Christians back then spent enough money on new church buildings in just 1 year.
Okay, on buildings.
To potentially provide 2 gospel booklets for every single home in 180 worlds the size of ours.
Whoa! Say that again. 2 booklets per home.
In 180 Earth-sized worlds, just from 1 year's spending on buildings in the U.S. at that time?
That really brings the scale of available resources versus their actual application into sharp focus, doesn't it?
It's staggering when you put it like that.
Yeah. Eastman's comparison there between infrastructure spending and the potential for just widespread basic gospel literature. It highlights a profound divergence. Priorities, potential impact.
Definitely makes you think. And then there's David Barrett's estimate, this one from 1997.
Okay, Barrett. What did he estimate?
He suggested that if you look at the harvest, new believers coming to faith.
Right, the results, so to speak.
The 1040 window nations yielded 100 times more fruit, dollar for dollar, hour for hour, compared to the rest of the world.
100 times more effective in those terms.
Yeah. And for certain specific ethno-linguistic groups within that region, he estimated the cost effectiveness was maybe 1,000 times higher.
1,000 times. That's incredible.
It is.
So connecting that back, Barrett's analysis strongly suggests a significantly greater return on investment if we're talking purely in terms of people embracing Christianity.
Right.
When resources are strategically aimed at unreached populations in the 1040 window, compared to regions where the gospel is already common.
That's the argument.
And our sources indicate these general trends, this greater evangelistic impact in these historically unreached areas. They seem to be continuing in various parts of the world today. It wasn't just a snapshot in the 90s.
Okay, so let's try and bring this all together. The key takeaway from this deep dive seems pretty clear. There's this undeniable and really quite significant imbalance in how Christian missionaries and essential resources are distributed globally.
A huge tilt.
Yeah. A substantial majority people and materials are concentrated in areas where the Christian faith is already established, already accessible.
Leaving a comparatively small proportion focused on those who have very limited or maybe zero access to any kind of Christian witness.
Exactly.
And this imbalance, well, it carries profound implications, doesn't it? For the billions of people around the world who just don't have much opportunity, if any, to encounter the core ideas of Christianity.
It really does.
It compels us to consider some important questions about our current priorities, our strategies in global mission work.
For sure. And that leads us, I think, to our final thought for you, the listener, to consider.
Okay.
Reflecting on these really significant imbalances we've discussed in missionaries, in resources, in focus, what fundamental shifts, maybe in thinking, maybe in practical action, what might be necessary to more effectively engage with unreached people groups across the globe? A big question. It is. It really prompts us to examine where our collective focus, our collective resources are actually directed.
And whether those allocations truly align with the scale of the global need as presented here.
Yeah. Something to definitely mull over.